Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the Education Exchange. Michelle and myself are back again. Michelle zooming in again from Reigate. So, good afternoon, Michelle. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. How are you?
Yes, good. It's all go at the moment, isn't it? But what a wonderful way to start talking about AI. And I know, well, it's not starting to talk about it. We've been talking about it for quite a while. But we're honoured to have Dr. Andy Kemp from the National Mathematics and Science College with us today. Andy, are you there as well?
I am. Hi,
Okay.
welcome. Lovely to see you.
Great. Well, thanks, Andy and Michelle. So, obviously, we've got three very, very different schools as well. So, what AI looks like in our schools is going to look very different for all of us, actually. So, Michelle in a dyslexia specialist school, and Andy, mathematics and science specialist school, and
Yeah.
LVS Ascot co-ed all ability school as well. So, Andy, you are the authority on this out of the three of us. That's why you're here. Okay. Can you give us a little bit of background, because we're all at a different starting point, aren't we? And
Yeah.
although a lot of people know about AI, and I think I read a survey that 60% of people know about ChatGPT, for example, but only
Yeah.
14% are probably using it. Could you give us a bit about a history and a sort of a backdrop about AI and how we've got to where we are at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. AI is not new, but it feels very new, and it's been a funny journey for us. I think over the last 2 or 3 years, as it's suddenly come to the forefront. In practice, we've all been using AI in our daily lives for all sorts of things for quite a while. Whether or not that's things like Siri or Alexa, who may or may not start talking to me in a second. We'll find out. Or things like which shows Netflix recommends to you, or when you use a GPS trying to work out how to get from A to B, which is the best route. All of these things are forms of artificial intelligence. In its most basic form, AI is simply any system which attempts to do something in the way that a human might approach it, but in a fully automated way. So it's not new technology, but generative AI, and particularly large language models in the form of things like ChatGPT, are really what's changed people's perception of this whole world. And it's happened really, really quickly. It was literally only about 2 years ago that nobody had really heard or thought about AI use in schools. And now it's hard to arrange or attend a conference that doesn't have at least 5 items about AI on it as part of it. So the world has moved on a lot. I think understanding what AI is and what it isn't helps you understand when it's appropriate to use it and when it isn't. And so I think a little bit of the background is helpful. Fundamentally, AI, certainly large language models like ChatGPT, are basically just very, very clever forms of autocomplete. So when you pick your phone up and you start typing something and it suggests the next word it thinks you might want is this, and then it suggests another one. You see those silly games that crop up on Facebook where you type somebody's name and then you type the next 5 words that it suggests in the middle. It is that kind of idea. So all AI is really doing is using a sophisticated form of autocomplete to guess what the next word in your sentence should be. What's really surprising, and I think was quite surprising for a lot of the AI engineers, was just how good that is, just how meaningful the results are that come out of the other end of it, and just how effective it is. We've created this world where you can now chat in real time to an artificial bot and have a really meaningful conversation about anything. There are still issues. It still suffers from things like hallucinations, where it starts making stuff up. And the reason it makes stuff up is because it doesn't know things. What it's doing is it's guessing. It's saying the most likely next word in this sentence will be this. And then after that word, the most likely next word in the sentence will be this. And that means that sometimes the most likely next word isn't actually true. And that's okay. And understanding that, I think, is really key to our understanding of how we use this technology effectively. So there's loads of stuff going on. We could talk for ages about kind of generative video, generative art, and maybe we'll look back and we'll talk about some of that later. But the fundamental concept is the same. It's a probabilistic model that says what's the most likely next thing to appear in this object, whether that's a pixel, whether or not that's a word, whether or not that's a note or a sound if it's generating music. It's all that probabilistic knowledge where it's saying, based on everything it's ever read, which is kind of most of the internet, what's the most likely thing to come next in there, which is why it's good at producing things that feel real and accurate, but also have a habit of feeling a touch generic. because they're a representation of the most likely outcome rather than the most interesting outcome. So we can talk about creativity, and I think creativity is a fascinating area in relation to AI. But it's definitely designing on the basis of synthesis. It's taking kind of knowledge that it has and regurgitating it in a predictable way to help us work out what we do with it.
That's great. And Michelle and Andy, I don't know if you've seen this, but have you been approached by companies and been offered to sit and feed it? Have you seen that? Michelle, have you had that at all?
Not yet. No, I'll be waiting on that invite.
Andy, are you aware of that?
Yeah, I've seen some bits going around in that area. So there's certainly the reality with AI is the output is only really as good as the input that goes in. And so particularly in the education field, as they're starting to develop models that they think will be more useful for schools, for teachers, for students, they need more content. And they need content that's specifically designed for that use. So I guess a really good example would be if you wanted to use an AI to generate school reports, then it's really good to feed it lots of good examples of what you think a good school report looks like, because it's more likely to emulate those. Whereas what it will otherwise do, if you ask ChatGPT to write school reports, it will do it, but it'll write it based upon a very general understanding of language and a general understanding of what it is it's being asked to describe and produce. And so the better the quality of data we feed into these systems, the better the outputs come. And that's certainly why the DfE have put quite a lot of money towards collecting data to generate better AI models in the future for education.
And I suppose if you've got people who are feeding it or it's working on certain things, there's going to be a level of bias, isn't there, in there?
Always. Yeah, bias is a perpetual problem with AI. It loops back round to that problem that your output is only as good as the input that goes in. And so if the data you're putting in is biased, then the output that comes out is inevitably biased. My favorite example of this was a Microsoft project about probably 4 or 5 years ago. They built a chatbot to put on Twitter, as was then, called Tay. And Tay spent 24 hours on Twitter and became misogynistic, racist, fascist, Nazi within 24 hours because it just engaged with the worst part of the internet. And it just learned from the content it was given, to the extent that Microsoft had to take the whole thing down within 24 hours because it was a disaster. But if you feed bad data into an AI, you get bad outcomes. And so it's really important that as we start to think about greater use of AI in education, that we think really carefully about the data sets that we're feeding that AI so that it gives the right kind of outcomes. So there are classic things like if you ask one of the image generator things to generate pictures of scientists, they'll all be men. They'll mostly be white men. And if you ask it to produce pictures of doctors, the same. But if you ask it to produce pictures of nurses, they'll all be female. And that's because that's the data it's being fed. And it's really important that we try and think really carefully about the data that we're producing so that we can avoid those kind of biased outcomes that will otherwise inevitably come out of the data, because that's the nature of the content that we've given it.
Andy, I was going to ask, then that sort of feeds into this whole thing that children really struggle with, and specifically children at my school, because they've all got special educational needs, is that fake news thing. So not just relying on whatever the internet tells you to be true. And it's the same with AI, and that's one of the areas that I have concern with it, is the ability for students to like really sort of critique the quality of the output. What do you do at your school to kind of go over that, if you can?
Yeah, it's a real problem. Fake news has become more and more difficult. I guess at one level, it's not a new problem. Photoshop has been around for a long time. We used to talk about you could trust your eyes, and kind of if you saw something, you knew it must be true. And then we started to recognize that Photoshop meant that actually we could manipulate images very easily. And so it moved towards, well, okay, if I've seen a video, must be trustworthy if I've seen a video, because it's too hard work to edit a video, and it's now not too hard to edit a video. Even in the recent US elections, we had various instances of voice emulation, fake videos being produced of candidates doing those kind of what they call hot mic things, where they say things off camera, but that never happened. it is an increasingly challenging problem, and it's one that requires both us as educators to try and help students see examples and understand examples of what good and bad things look like, encouraging them to go away and make sure that they've done their research. If you see something on Facebook, do you also go away and Google it to check that the thing you've seen is true before you like it and forward it? Because that's how these things spread. And the problem is that social media algorithms prioritize engagement. And so the more salacious, the more ridiculous the headline is, the more likely somebody is to click on it and therefore share it, and therefore it gets spread more widely. And ultimately, it's that thing that a lie goes around the world. Well, I forget what the expression is. Is a lie goes around the world faster than the truth makes it to the front door or something? I've heard something along those lines. But it's true that the kind of a good salacious article will be everywhere before anyone's had a chance to think about whether or not it might be true or not. And the correction, as it does with the newspapers, appears on page 67 of the newspaper at the back in a small box at the bottom corner. It doesn't matter that it's been dissuaded afterwards. So I think there's work for us to do in terms of our education and encouraging young people to think carefully and cautiously, and let's be honest, not just young people, kind of everybody to think cautiously and carefully about the things that they see online and whether or not they're true. I think there is also, though, significant work to be done in terms of regulation. Regulating this space is really, really hard. There are no easy answers. Social media companies are very keen to make it clear that they're not publishers. They see their role as just they provide a mechanism for people to talk, and they make the free speech argument. But fundamentally, I'm not sure that holds water. I think they have to have some responsibility for making sure that they're not spreading lies around the world.
Agree. Absolutely agree.
What does it look like in your school, Michelle? How are your children using AI?
So from my perspective, I obviously am cautious with using AI because of the needs of our students. So everybody at Moon Hall has SEN, special educational needs. They all have dyslexia as a primary needs, but many of them have dyspraxia, dyscalculia, ASD, ADHD as well. So in many ways, we know that children with special educational needs are more vulnerable than a child that doesn't have any form of diagnosis. That said, I use AI an awful lot. We have a head of assistive technology who's a middle manager here at the school. All of our students have assistive technology lessons. And actually, now that they're very competent at using the dictation, the reading software, the assistive tech, those lessons are actually more geared towards the use of AI and using AI effectively to help them with their tasks. So it's a big thing for us here because I really believe that AI levels the playing field for many children with special educational needs. So where my students might really struggle is to get started on a task. So a lot of my staff will use AI, just as an example in English, for example, they'll put up an image that's generated by AI. And then there'll be a whole discussion around that image. What does the image show? What do you think's happening here? And then the children would be asked to write an essay or a creative writing piece on that image that's been shown. And I think structuring the essay is really good using AI. It's really difficult. So I teach science and I've got 9 students who are doing in year 11 that are doing BTEC science. Their reading age is around about, for the whole group, about age 6. So their reading is really, it's such a huge challenge for them. They cannot access the learning without using assistive tech or using AI. And where it's really, really difficult in science, and Andy, you might sort of agree with this, they'll use AI to generate their work. And then I'll say to them, yeah, that's great. Now you've got to put it in your own words. It can't be just taken, copy. How can you translate something that's binary and scientifically, factually correct into something that's your own words? That is really, really difficult, and especially difficult for children who have literacy difficulties when they read it and they say, what do I take out the word the or of or all these sort of connectives? It doesn't actually change the statement that's made. So yes, it's got huge benefits and I absolutely love it. but it's also got its drawbacks as well. I really love AIPI, or is it PIAI? I can't remember which way the letters go around, because it is verbal instructions. So for students who have dyslexia and who might struggle to formulate that prompt, and as Andy said, it's the quality of your prompt that's really, really important. Doing it verbally really, really helps the students. So for me, huge advocate of it. I use it daily. In every single lesson, my kids are using it in my science group to get them started on the tasks, or to proofread things, or to summarize things, or to get a plan together. So yeah, we use it a lot.
That's brilliant. And Andy,
There's some great examples there. Sorry, I was just going to say, there's some wonderful examples you were talking about within there of really good things, and many of them aren't new. Kind of grammar checkers, spell checkers. These are all forms of AI in one form or other. And actually, most of those assistive tech devices that we talk about, so things like screen readers, the voice is AI generated. So there are lovely examples of things that you don't necessarily think about being traditionally AI, but phenomenally important within there. And I can't agree more with the importance of AI being about dealing with that blank page problem. For many students across all sorts of disciplines, whether or not they have special needs or not, that blank page effect can be really crippling. Even for me, I know when I'm writing something like a talk or a presentation, that first hour that I spend staring at a blank piece of paper trying to work out what I'm doing is awful. Whereas actually AI enables me to get something that I can then throw half of it away and end up with something that I really like from it. But it just gets me moving much more quickly. And I think that's the great value in terms of the leveling of it. And we'll see that just grow and develop. The ability of things like Microsoft's Copilot to take a Word document that you've written and turn it into a PowerPoint presentation for you, at least as a first stab, is exciting and really interesting. And I think there's a whole load of kind of nice tools that are coming along over the next few years that will really help, as you say, level that playing field and give people the advantages that they've missed out on, so that they can continue to kind of compete with everybody else in the workplace and in the work life environment afterwards. So yeah, really excited about the potential of those things to kind of lift that tide.
And I think
down with my sorry, I was scribbling with my pen here. Documents made into PowerPoints. I love that. And I love the blank page bit, because I am a terrible person at getting started on something as well. Michelle, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on Microsoft Copilot. I've been using that a lot recently, and I do a fortnightly bulletin to parents. And sometimes I try to make it as engaging as possible, give a little bit of summary, what's going on over the past couple of weeks. But sometimes I'll want to sort of find some relevant piece of history or a quote that sort of ties in with the theme. Historically, I would have spent hours and hours and hours looking through the internet, trying to find something that really matched up, that was really credible, quite poignant, and had that impact that I was looking for. I can do that in seconds now with AI, and it's not detracting from the quality and the content that I put into the bulletin. It's just time saving for me, rather than doing the whole searching side of things. It's like my little personal assistant that will go and find out the information for me. So that's why I personally, for my role as a head teacher, love it, just because of the time that it saves me on tasks.
And it is quite creative as well, isn't it? You find that, when you're, as you say, Andy and Michelle, when you want to get cracking on something, it is creative. It does open up the creative paths, really, doesn't it, for what you're doing, and it allows you the time to be more creative, I think. And Andy, in your college, because obviously, maths and AI, what's the issues there?
That's a great question. So that is something that's changing quite quickly at the moment. So 2 years ago, when I first started talking to people about AI and ChatGPT and those kind of things, you could ask it fairly basic questions, mathematical questions. It would routinely get them wrong. And I think, again, it loops back around to what I was saying at the beginning about what it is and what it isn't. If you think about how it does calculations, it traditionally did calculations by saying what's the most likely next number to appear in this string of numbers. That's not a great way of doing calculations. And it used to get things wrong, like the classic kind of how many S's are there in the word Mississippi? And it would just get completely lost in that. It still sometimes gets completely lost in those kind of problems. But it has come on leaps and bounds. So ChatGPT 4.0 preview, which is the current kind of pinnacle of their operating projects, can now kind of do a decent job of solving quite a lot of maths Olympiad style problems. So these are the hardest problems that students would meet in any education form prior to university. And it can now do a decent job of solving many of those. It's been interesting watching the way in which it changes the way it approaches these things now. So you'll find ChatGPT, when it realizes it needs to do a calculation, it knows it doesn't know how to. So what it does is it writes some Python code, and then it runs the Python code, and it takes the answer from the Python code and feeds it back into its answer. And all of that happens transparently in the background. But the way in which they've worked around the fact that it wasn't good at doing maths, but it was quite good at writing computer code, is it now writes the code, runs the code, and takes the answer and feeds it back into the algorithm. So it now does a really good job. If you feed it an average GCSE question, particularly now it's got some screen learning, so you can take photos and you can put the picture in. It will do a decent job of answering most GCSE levels and quite a lot of A-level questions very effectively. It does struggle with complicated diagrams and those kind of things, but all of that stuff is getting much, much better.
So I think it was you that gave me an example. I think the last time we spoke about if you put 2 shirts on a washing line, it takes a certain amount of time. How long would it take if you put 10 out there?
Yeah.
Are those sort of problems solved now? Can it do that?
Yeah, they're much better than they were. So it will still sometimes get those kind of rates, because what it's doing is, to be fair, what a lot of students do when you ask that question, which is it goes, oh, that looks like a rates question. So if it takes 2 shirts to an hour to dry, then it must take half an hour per shirt. So if there are 10, then it must take 5 hours, which is clearly nonsense, because if you hang the shirts out, it doesn't matter how many shirts I hang out, they're all going to dry in the same rate. But what it can do is it can fall into that trap in exactly the same way that students fall into that trap of saying, this question looks like it's this type of question, and therefore applying that type of logic to it. And I don't think it's any better or worse than people are often at some of those questions. But it's about being aware that those kind of things are the things it might still get wrong. And I think that whole awareness of what it is good at and what it isn't good at helps us use it much more effectively.
Do you think there's some... Sorry, Michelle, go on.
Oh, I was just, no, you follow up on your question. I've got a sort of different topic that I'd like to ask Andy something about, if that's okay.
Yeah. We're going to keep you here all afternoon, Andy, you know that, don't you?
All good.
Yeah, I was going to... actually, do you know, it's gone out of my head now, but what do you think as head teachers about staff using AI to write reports?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. So I've had that conversation with quite a lot of heads over the last 2 years. My view has always been, I don't employ my teachers to be good at writing reports. I employ them to be really good classroom practitioners, and I want them to be the best that they possibly can be at that. And if to communicate their understanding of the child effectively to the parent, they can do that better by using AI. I don't see how anybody is losing out. Where the risk is, I think, is where reports are very generic. But that's always been the risk, I think. Kind of, if you look at the teachers I've met over my career who find report writing the hardest, they tend to produce fairly generic reports anyway. And actually, AI may well help them produce things that are more meaningful and more colourful and more useful for the parent. I think there's a slight risk that we end up in a kind of AI cycle where you've got teachers using AI to write the reports and then parents using AI to summarize the report back at the other end. And I think one of the trends that has been deeply unhelpful for our sector over the last 20 years has been the length of reports. I think if I go back to my school reports, I got a sentence or so from each teacher. And actually that sentence was very carefully thought about. And now we often get 2 or 3 paragraphs, which say probably less than that one sentence did at times. So I think there is some things to do in there, but I personally have no issue with it. Some of the heads I've spoken to have concerns about it and feel that their parents might have concerns about it. But I think as long as we are honest and overt about what is the point of the report, it's to share useful and meaningful information between the teacher and the parent, then the bit that happens in between doesn't really matter. It's just process from my perspective.
So I don't mind sharing that I actually used AI to write some of my summer term reports for my year 10 group at the time. But what I would say that and it goes back to the point about the quality of the prompt. So actually what I put in as the prompt was far more detailed than was allowed to be in the actual report itself, because you're limited normally for the number of characters. So what I was using the AI for was to make my sentences better structured, more concise, and hit those points that I wanted to be able to include because of the restriction on the number of characters. And I agree with what Andy says, that at the end of the day, if my staff use AI and it saves them some time that they can then use on their planning and their preparation or on some other tasks, if the quality of the reports is better, when using AI, I have no issue with it. I'm more than happy. I think where I would just want staff to spend the time is making sure that that report looks like you really know that child, that it's not just something that you've copied and pasted between each individual. And for me, when I was doing my reports in the summer and using AI, I had a whole paragraph of information that I wanted to include on each individual student. It did save me time because it made it all structured nicely. So I think, yeah, the prompt, the input has got to be key to this.
So you had a question for Andy.
Yeah,
Michelle.
it's slightly different. Is that okay? I mean, it's obviously to do with AI, but it's on, Andy was talking about image generation. And one of the issues that I have is, and it's the area of AI that actually doesn't save me any time, because every time I do the image generation, it's not what I'm looking, the output isn't good enough. It's not good enough quality. And you've got the whole AI hands thing where they've got like missing fingers and it just doesn't look great. I use Adobe Firefly for helping with that, and generally it's pretty good. If I want an image that's more cartoon or non-realistic, the quality is slightly better. If I want something like you mentioned, like a scientist or an actual person, a photographic image generation, it's not so good. And I just wondered, what do you use if you're using image generation AI, and what are your sort of top tips to avoid the missing fingers?
The missing finger problem has been a notorious one for a while, and kind of arms that disappear in the back of photographs and those kind of things. I think a lot of the photography stuff that you'll see more commonly is AI being used to edit photographs. So starting from a photograph. So within iOS 18.2, so the photos on the Mac and on an iPhone now has a cleanup tool. And you can just swipe your finger over a little bit of the image, like a person or a tree or a bin or whatever, and it will vanish, as if that person had never been there, and it will guess what was in that image. And that's a fascinating process that's going on, because clearly it has no idea what was behind that thing. And therefore the image is no longer true. It's a partial representation. In terms of kind of complete image generation, I use ChatGPT because I use the paid version of ChatGPT quite a lot for PowerPoint type presentations. So, or maybe stuff for LinkedIn or for social media. So I'll often say I want a square image, because I like square images. If I'm doing PowerPoints, that's the kind of shape I want. So I'll tell it what I'm looking for. I'll tend to tell it to avoid words, because I don't know if you've tried asking it to include words, but its spelling goes to pieces very quickly.
Yeah.
And again, the rationale, the reason it's bad at doing words is because it's generating the image by saying what pixels should go near this pixel. And that's how it's building it up. It's going kind of based on this pixel, what should the pixels around it look like? And then it's doing that on a kind of iterative basis to generate the tokens that put together the image. And as a result, it has no real sense of the kind of complete picture at the end of it in the same way that we would if we were developing as an artist. So that works quite well. ChatGPT basically uses OpenAI's DALL-E 2 engine underneath it. I've always liked DALL-E because it's a very silly name. So it's amalgamation of DALL-E with Wall-E from Pixar, and it's the two smashed together to create DALL-E 2. But it's a good engine. There are plenty of other ones out there, and at the moment, each of them is better at some things than others. So you do really need to kind of shop around a little bit to find the one that's going to do the type of activity you're looking for. They are generally all better at the slightly more cartoony end. The photorealism stuff is out there, and it's being used for all sorts of really interesting things. So I came across one recently where you upload kind of 10 or 15 headshots of yourself, and it will generate business standard photo headshots for you in different scenarios, different environments, different outfits. And they're all kind of you, and they're all kind of not you. But
Have you tried that? Have you tried that one yourself?
I played with it. I didn't like any of them enough. So I will stick with my existing headshot, although my existing headshot has a beard in it, so I might have to do something about that. But there's some really interesting stuff going on in that area. It's not as well developed. And likewise, the work on video is nowhere near as developed, but is coming along in leaps and bounds. Some of the demos that OpenAI put out a year ago around kind of video generation, where you can type a description and it will produce a kind of an AI 30-second clip of something, is really interesting. And what that means in the long term in terms of TV creation, film, movies, all of that stuff, I don't know. It's certainly going to change those industries in a way that is very difficult to predict at the moment. Because at the moment, if you produce even a kind of a short cartoon style thing, that's hours and hours of work by very, very highly talented professionals working kind of particularly hard on that. And whether or not AI will change that whole field, I just don't know. I suspect so.
And beyond that, as being a musician myself, a traditional musician that plays real instruments, right, there's going to be a lot of AI generated music now as well, isn't it? You know, going on what you were saying about the video content then, I mean, and it's a bit like plagiarism, isn't it? Because there's only so many notes, there's only so many chords, there's only so many sequences in music. Have you come across anything like that, about where there's been any kind of litigation or anything by anything that's been AI generated?
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of litigation going on around the AIs that have been trained on data. So more of it is happening around the text ones, just because they're a bit bigger. So at the text end, there's certainly some law suits going on around the use of newspaper articles, which were used as part of training the AI, but weren't. No permission was sought, no money was paid, all of those kind of things. We are seeing similar things with art, certainly, and we will see similar things with music as well. It's an interesting area, I think, because at one level, and I'm probably a Philistine for saying it, but I think all art is to some extent derivative. It's all based upon things that have come before it in some form or other. I think great art is where somebody is able to take those derivative ideas and do something novel with them. And I think that's the bit that AI probably won't do quickly, if at all. I think it's the nature of the algorithms are always going to kind of blur towards that slightly elevator style of music. There are a couple of quite entertaining AI music generators out there. I can't remember the name of the one I was using recently, where you can type a description of a song with a theme for it, and you can explain the style you want, and 30 seconds later you've got a music kind of a song generated for you. And so that stuff will certainly happen. And if you look at the kind of royalty-free style music that people use for background videos on YouTube and those kind of things, so they can avoid having to pay royalties on them, that stuff's really easy now. You can generate royalty-free music for nothing very quickly, and it has a use, and it has a place. Is it going to take over? No, probably not. But it might end up being part of the journey, in the same way we were talking about that kind of blank page issue with writing. You may well have the same thing when you're trying to write a piece of music. So you want to write a song in a particular style, in a particular key. So you ask the computer to go away and give you kind of a basic outline. And then you vary it from there, and you edit some bits, and you move some things around, and you try some different bits. I think you'll certainly find the process of composition for pop music in particular is likely to evolve, and the ability to use a kind of digital audio workspace, a DAW, to ask it to generate a set of drums to match this style, and then say, actually, I don't like those drums, change them for a different type of drums and move those things around. Let's add a bass line to it. No, I don't like that bass line. Why don't you try something a little bit different? I want something a little bit more funky, or whatever it is. And being able to build these things up in a kind of iterative process. And I think that iterative process idea is the fundamental one that we are still missing in terms of our education of AI with students. A lot of people think that the best way to use AI is to throw a single prompt at it and it produce a single answer to it. I'm a great believer that actually that to and fro produces much more interesting answers, much more interesting outcomes. So you can say, I want you to produce this thing. So I'll give you a practical example I've been dealing with recently. So my family and I are going to New York at Christmas. I'm very excited. It'll be great fun. But I was trying to plan our agenda. So I said to ChatGPT, we're going to go to New York from this day to this day. What are the things that you think we should do while we're there? And I gave some lists, and I went through and said, well, I like these things. I'd really like to include those. I'm not too fussed about these. Can you put together an initial agenda for me? And so it put together a timescale, and then I asked it to go away and find the costs for each of those things and tell me roughly what it was going to be. And then to think about restaurants that would be nearby to those things so that we could find places to eat. And over the course of probably what was 2 or 3 hours of looping round and round, we put together a kind of initial schedule for that holiday with links that I could use to go out and buy the tickets for the various bits and pieces. And it just kind of helped me think about all the things I wanted to do. It went away and read TripAdvisor for me and came up with good advice on some of the venues and some of the things. It checked the opening hours of the bits and pieces that were going on around it. And that kind of ongoing iterative process, I think, is such an interesting way of producing a proper outcome. In the same way that if I was going to sit down with a travel agent and plan a holiday, I wouldn't say, I want to go to New York for 5 days, go and sort it all out, please. We'd have a conversation, we'd go back and forth, they'd come back with an initial plan, I'd go back to them and go, I like these bits, but not those bits. But it's doing all of that in real time with the computer, I think enables us to produce really interesting things. And I think that's probably where the creativity in the art augmented by AI is going to come from, is that iterative process. You go and you go, create me a picture of sunflowers, and you get some sunflowers, and that's lovely. And you go, well, that's great, but these are the things I like about the image, and these are the things I don't like about the image. Can you have another go? And then you go loop around that process, and gradually you refine it down to the thing that you really wanted. And I think that's where you're still adding your creativity to that process. And I think we'll see that happening both in terms of art and AI, and in terms of music and AI. And I think accepting that AI augmentation is going to be a core part of how lots of things happen doesn't mean that we take the humanity out of it. We just hopefully find slightly quicker and more efficient ways of getting from A to B.
We've got our first question here. Oh, we got a question from Seb. Does anyone have an experience with MS Copilot?
Yep.
Far away.
So Copilot is the Microsoft AI. So it's based on ChatGPT. So it's using the same idea. The benefit of Copilot is that it's integrated into well, it depends which version of Copilot. So there's Microsoft Copilot, the website, which is basically ChatGPT 4. It's pretty much the same thing. It's not doing anything particularly interesting beyond that. But Microsoft Copilot, the suite of apps that go around Microsoft, is taking that whole AI area and integrating it into your data. So it can read your documents, it can read your emails, it can summarize them. I can go in and I can say, I took some notes in this OneNote document. I'd like you to turn that into a proposal in a Word document, and then take that Word document and say, I'd like you to produce a PowerPoint presentation from it. And then I'd like you to do some analysis of the data that comes back from this questionnaire in Excel. And so the idea is it's kind of an AI that knows you, but more importantly, knows your things, and can interact with them. It's not where I'd like it to be yet. It's good at some things, and it's getting better every year. And I think the potential is phenomenally exciting. And my argument, anyone who's ever heard me talk about AI will know that my argument isn't that the AI we have today is neither here nor there, really, in the grand scheme of things. Where AI is going to become really important is as it starts to get built into the software and the systems we use day in, day out, and it becomes just normalized. And that's why I'm really excited about Microsoft Copilot, because that's a system that is used by millions of people, if not billions of people around the world every day. And as that AI systems get built into that and it becomes normalized, then it just becomes part of what we do. And I think that's the real excitement for it for me. Michelle, you use it as well, don't you?
Yeah, I use it. It's great. Love it.
Deb was saying that it's £300 per license for the suite. So
Yeah.
are these sort of quite high costs for these things at the moment? And will we see them coming down? Probably.
Yeah, inevitably. So the cost of running these AI models is very high for the companies. So OpenAI is running at a loss, and most of these companies are running at a loss. on these products at the moment, just because the cost of everything you ask it to do is actually quite high in terms of computational power. So it's going to take us a while. But the one thing we know for absolute certain with anything technology related is that things will get faster and cheaper every year. And so, yes, at the moment, it's quite an expensive thing. Give it 10 years. I don't think anyone will even think about the costs. I think it'll be negligible by that point. How long it takes over that 10-year period, I'm never very good at guessing. Futurology is not a particularly easy skill. But you're right, those costs are profound at the moment, and they are significant, and they're so high that in most cases, most schools are not going to go very far with it. So we have 2 co-pilot licenses at the college. I have one, and my director of studies has one that we're using to experiment with and find out whether or not it's worth investing more in it than that.
This opens up a whole thing about equity, doesn't it? Sorry, Michelle, go on, you go.
No, it was actually one of the questions that I had given, and then it sort of leads on quite nicely. So whether you're an independent school or whether you're a state school, budgets and finances are key to the successful running of the school. And like you've just sort of mentioned there's sometimes quite a lot of cost associated with things. But what are the best freebies? What are the best freebies that somebody could use, either as in their role as a leader or a teacher or someone in a school, or the best freebies for kids and students to use?
Yeah, I think my go-to will always be ChatGPT. The free version of ChatGPT is incredibly powerful and has come on massively. So if you were playing with it a year ago and haven't looked at it for a year, it's a completely different system now in terms of what you're actually getting. And ChatGPT are making some of their premium models available for free now. And that makes a huge difference. So I think that's a really great place to start. My suspicion is Microsoft and Google, once they work out the legal bits, and there are still some issues around the age limits for these different software packages and when you're allowed to use them. And that's mostly because they don't have the appropriate safeguards built in. But I think as those things get resolved, it will become much more common. And I think schools, I'd be amazed if Microsoft don't reach the point in the next 5 years where Copilot's effectively built into your license as a school. Google are already kind of heading that way. Gemini is built into some of Workplace for Education, not as much as if you get the paid license. But as those costs come down, I think they'll become much more commonplace, and therefore those issues around equity, which are so important. And it is that classic problem with new technologies, which is those that can afford it reach them first, and those that probably need them most get them last. And so one of the things I think is really important as a sector that we work on is building up that equity. It's part of the reason I'm involved with another charitable group called the Good Futures Foundation. The Good Futures Foundation is focused on trying to help schools do AI better. And so we're working really hard on trying to support both the independent sector and the state sector. And part of the way that which we're doing that is we've developed an AI checklist for schools to use to help them think about the strategic planning and those kind of areas. And we provide that for free for state schools, whereas we charge independent schools a small fee for it to help run that charitable organization. So I think there are people out there who are trying to make a difference in terms of it, but it is difficult, and equity is not where we would want it to be. The starting problem is most state schools don't have enough computers, full stop. It doesn't matter whether or not they can afford the AI bit at the other end of it. They've got limited access to the technology. They've got aging computer suites. They've probably not got laptops. They're unlikely to have one-to-one devices, which is common in many independent schools. So it's a very different environment, and that makes it really hard, I think, for us to tackle some of those equity problems.
That is a huge issue, isn't it? I mean, it's in all areas of education, but it's something that I hadn't really given much thought to until, today, talking about this, the equity situation, and the divide in education as well. Both of you, what do you think? Are there too many platforms out there? So, are we over-reliant on AI-generated learning tools? Because there's a lot, aren't there?
Yeah, it's a difficult thing. We are still in the kind of the Wild West era of AI, which means that lots of things are coming out very quickly. Some of them are lasting a little while. Many of them will die and disappear on the vine. It will take a while for the dust to settle, I think, on that. I think if you were to imagine what schools will look like kind of 5-10 years from now, I think you'll find that your AI is built into things like your textbooks. So you'll be using e-textbooks, and you'll have an AI built into it that you can ask it to test you. You can ask it to generate revision notes for you, to generate revision cards for you, to help you revise a particular topic. I think that's an area of real growth. That's an area that South Korea is really taking a lead on. They're committed to AI textbooks or AI augmented textbooks in all core subjects, I think by the end of this year or possibly the end of next year. So they're kind of leading on that. And I think what you'll find is that kind of gradual reduction down to a smaller number of core systems that you're using. So whatever your management information system is, whether it's ISAMs or SIMs or whatever, you'll find that it will get built into there over a period of time. And the ability to use AI to help generate reports will be something that the school gets to decide whether it's on or off as an option. But it won't be something where you're taking data out of your management information, generating your reports over here, and then re-importing them back in as people are at the moment. It will become just part of the system that you use. And I think that kind of gradual evolution, I think, will mean that schools are able to refine down the number of different moving parts that are going on at the moment. And the different moving parts is problematic, not only because it's complicated to support, but it's also problematic because it leaves open the possibility of data leaks and people putting the wrong data into the wrong system. And therefore Data Protection Act issues and all of those kind of things. So schools do need to be cautious and thoughtful about how they use these systems. My general advice is kind of never put students' full names into any AI ever, because if you avoid that, then you're probably in a reasonably safe bet, and obviously not including addresses and that kind of information as well. But if you're only working with students' first names, you're probably on a reasonably safe grounds in terms of the kind of things you're doing. There are obviously, each school will make its own decisions as to how it interprets the Data Protection Act and the regulations around it. But it is important to look at which systems do promise to protect your data as well and use them effectively, and which ones are effectively selling your data or using your data to train the AI afterwards and all of that kind of stuff.
I think also as well, if you're going to if you want your school to adopt AI and to use AI, then it's really important that you're not asking them to look at too many different things. So any sort of introduction of new software or new ways of doing things, you've got to kind of keep it plain and simple. Otherwise, you're going to lose people along the way that are just going to say too difficult for me, or I don't really understand it, or not get maximum benefits out of it. So I think it's really important to focus on sort of key things that you think are going to be beneficial for the teachers or the staff in the school. And likewise for children like my kids who have got SEN, if I gave them too many options, they're just going to get really frustrated with the technology, and it's not going to work, and they're going to forget how to access it and what to do and what the steps are involved. So I think it's really sticking to things that you have tried and tested personally that you can then help them with if they get stuck or not quite sure how to use it. And we tend to stick with the ChatGPT. I also really like Claude AI.
Yep.
Claude is pretty decent. And for PowerPoint generation, we have used Gamma quite a lot. The only downside with Gamma is that you get a certain number of credits, and then once those credits run out, and the kids get really disappointed because they've found this new amazing tool that will generate a lovely revision PowerPoint for them, and then they run out of credits and they can't do it anymore without doing the subscription. So I think it's bearing in mind those things as well. Things that are free at the start, are they always free before you get people hooked into them, and then they kind of get annoyed with it? So yeah, I think it's about taking the whole school on the journey with you. So I think it's quite important not to use too many different things that then become confusing.
No, absolutely. And I think if I were to offer general advice to schools, if you're a Microsoft school, start by looking at Copilot and get the students and the staff playing with that, because the web version of Copilot is free. And if you're a Google school, start with Gemini, because you've got those systems. They're built into the things you're already subscribed to. They are part of what your world and your ecosystem. And whilst there are possibly better things out there that do other things, they both do what they do really well. And they're a good place to start gently. And they're both low risk because they make promises about how they'll use your data. And so if you're using Copilot, that your data is your data and it won't be used to train other things, and it won't be leaked out of that system. And so it's a good, sensible place for you to start your journey whilst you think about what other things you might want to do.
I just follow on to that as well, because we've been talking about privacy and data and things, and then obviously then there's a safeguarding element, isn't there, of AI and all the dangers, and we've heard some horror stories about things that have happened. Andy, what do you think the key issues are at the moment?
I think the key issues are fundamentally related to the fake news stuff we were discussing earlier. So the ability for AI to be used by bad actors to generate fake content of any form is a significant issue. Whether or not that's as relatively kind of simple as creating something where you create an AI where it, I don't know, teacher swears or something, and then it gets used against them and it gets published on social media, or you do that kind of hot mic type thing where you're trying to catch somebody out saying something or doing something in the background which they didn't do and they weren't involved with. So there's that kind of level where you can get people into trouble for doing something. The much bigger concern, I think, is the ability to generate photorealistic and video realistic content. And we heard that case in the news about a week ago about the gentleman that was involved in generating child pornography and using AIs to generate child pornography based upon real images of real children who were fully dressed and fully clothed, but then creating kind of fake images of them in inappropriate and deeply uncomfortable and unpleasant situations. And the reality is the technology exists to do that, and we can't control it as much as we would like to. I remember being in a conversation with somebody about 6 or 8 months ago who was questioning whether or not they needed to take down all the images of students from their website, because anybody could turn up on your social media or your website, take a picture of one of your students and then do something deeply inappropriate with it, and then threaten and blackmail them or just publish it online or whatever. And it's really hard to know, because short of basically never publishing anything that has a student in it or a young person in it, you can't actually control that situation. All we can do is rely upon the police doing their job to step in afterwards. And to some extent, whilst it is scary and it's not a good thing and it's really worrying, it's also not fundamentally new. Kind of creation of inappropriate images or fake nudes of people using Photoshop, kind of photoshopping somebody's head onto somebody else's body, all of this stuff. This has all been happening for a long time. It's not a fundamentally new problem. I think the main issue with AI is just how easy it makes it. Because it doesn't require any significant technical skills. It doesn't require very much time. The commercial AI systems are good because they do include safeguards within them. So they'll say, no, I can't do that. I won't do that. That's not appropriate. All of those kind of things. And that's great. But anybody who wants to do things that they shouldn't be doing, it's not that hard to find the systems online if you spend some time searching to do things that you shouldn't be doing. They really, we wouldn't want them to be doing. So it's one of those classic problems where there is no easy answer. The technology is there. If people want to do it, they're going to do it. The best we can do is make people aware that it might happen. And importantly, what to do if it does happen. And then we support and encourage and support the people who need it should things go wrong.
Following on for that, and another big safeguarding thing, I think, recently going on a marketing trip on a flight, I watched a film, a very good film, about a chap who started up a relationship with an AI bot. Now, we're hearing about that happening as well with children. I don't know if anybody's come across that at all, but that's another worry, isn't it, for parents? Anybody got any experience of that?
I had a student at my school and his mum found out that he had created an AI bot girlfriend and was talking to this girlfriend. He'd created what they looked like, and it did sort of start to become in the safeguarding sort of side of things. He was starting to use innuendo and propositions and can you show me this and all that kind of stuff. And so it was a safeguarding concern for us. It had to have the whole safeguarding procedure about sharing information online about yourself, sharing images of yourself online. And I think it's just an added extra of the safeguarding concerns that we already have to deal with and already have to teach our children about. But I think again, I mentioned it at the start, kids with SEN are more vulnerable, they're more trusting, and they can't always tell that when that person that you're speaking to on the internet isn't a real person or isn't a bot, for example. So, and I'm not saying that to kind of make out that kids at my school are not bright and not intelligent, but
No.
they're just too trusting,
Yeah.
like a lot of children are, and they see the goodness in people before they'll see anything negative. So yeah, we've had to address it in our assistive tech, our AI lessons with the kids, and on our PSHE days as well that we do at the school here, about the whole fake news, the bots, the revenge porn, and all this kind of different things as well, that are just topics that as teachers we're not trained about. We've not had the training on it, so we've got to just make sure that our policies, our procedures that we have in place are there to protect the children as much as possible.
Yeah, I think the whole romance scam concept is something that is only going to become much more complicated and much worse, because historically those were operated effectively by, well, farms of people, actually mostly in Asia, who were kind of trafficked and then made to work in kind of factories doing these kind of romance scams where they pretend to be somebody and they make you fall in love with them, and then they ask you to invest in cryptocurrency, and then they take all your money away from you effectively. But the thing is that AI means that you can now automate that whole process. And you can have an AI that has read your entire public Facebook feed, knows exactly who you are, exactly what you like, what you're interested in, what you want to do, and then can perfectly match itself to the things that you're looking for, which is going to make it so much harder to spot these kind of fake things. Because at the moment, to some extent, I look at it and I think, well, I don't really understand how people fall for it. Of course, I do understand how people fall for it, but many of them are so poorly written and poorly done. You kind of think, how could anyone get this wrong? But the quality of that content is just going to get so much better and so much sharper and so much more targeted at you. And that's not just in the context of things like romance scams, which are a concern of their own, but think about political advertising. Political advertising, which is targeted not at people, but as you as a person that has read your entire social media history and says, these are the hot button things that will get you to vote for this particular issue in this particular way, and that will kind of lead you down that route. And that kind of personally targeted advertising, I think, is something that is going to become really, really core and common to our day-to-day existence. And learning to think about how do we manage the fact that no longer are we being hit by kind of adverts or contacts that are designed to catch a wide audience, but actually are particularly targeted at you based upon your history and your past, to make you do a certain thing in a certain environment. I think that's a real worry and something that we need to grapple with as a society.
Are we having enough conversations, do you think, as parents, as teachers? I think, well, maybe we're quite informed as being teachers, but the general public themselves. I mean, there's what you were just saying about the romance scams, Andy. There's a brilliant Netflix series on that as well, and people do get caught with those kinds of things. So, you know, I mean, we're coming up to the end of the session now. So, if there's one takeaway from both of you about, or a bit of advice out there, what would it be? Andy first.
I think if I can offer advice, it's simply to be inquisitive, find out more. And if you've never used an AI, my best piece of advice is just go and log on, create a ChatGPT account, and just ask it some things about things that are interested to you. Ask it to help you plan something else, ask it to help you do something. Because the more you play with it, the more you'll start to understand its strengths and weaknesses. It's not the answer to everything, but it is the answer to a lot of things. And the line I use a lot with people is, your job is unlikely to be replaced by AI, but it might well be replaced by somebody who's using AI. And understanding where you sit within there and how you can use the technology to augment your practice, your day-to-day experience, whatever it is you do, I think it has the potential to make your life more interesting and better, used well. And even if you don't like it, even if you think it's a horrible thing and it shouldn't happen, I'm sad to say it's happening, and it's going to happen whether you like it or not. And so my advice is find out more about it and try and find the good things in it, because there are many. There are very scary things as well, and we've touched on some of them over the last hour, but there are lots of exciting things as well. And let's focus as much on the positives as the negatives as we work our way through the next 5-10 years as a society and as a world, and find out what this all means for us.
Shall?
I think be cautiously open to the use of AI in your school. I think it's being aware that it's not going to suit everyone, to find those right apps and platforms to use that suit your school demographic. It's being aware of the safeguarding elements and where things could potentially go wrong with it. And it's just like Andy said, play about with things, find what you are comfortable advocating for and advocating the use of, and make sure it aligns with your school values and what you're trying to achieve, and then look to implement and bring any change in your school, bring everybody along with you. Parents, I mean, we run parent webinars, student support, and staff drop-in work time sessions during lunchtime. So yeah, I think just be cautious and do your own research.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Michelle. I'm going to go and compose some music, and I know where to get started as well. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. It's been great. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.
Thank you
Take
so
care.
much.
Bye-bye.